As a comic book creator, I think the biggest thing you can do is create a comic or a character that will outlive you. Not many people are able to meet this feat, but when you do create a character that's evergreen and has the ability to live through multiple generations, you can either treat that character with the utmost care and love as if it's your own child, or you can treat that character as a golden goose or a cash cow and milk that bad boy till it's dry. Today's comic book legend we are going to talk about in this video actually did both, to the benefit and detriment of said character, leaving his once prominent household comic in a weird, though successful, state of limbo. In 1992, Todd McFarlane broke away from Marvel to co-found Image Comics, a bold move that would change the comic industry forever. Image gave comic creators ownership of their work, and McFarlane wasted no time in launching Spawn. The debut issue sold over 1.7 million copies, making it one of the best-selling independent comics of all time. It had everything: edgy artwork, a tortured protagonist, demonic lore, and a distinctive style that screamed 90s rebellion that the grunge crowd could lean into.
Dude, it was the best. It wasn't until Greg Coppola started drawing Spawn, and that's when it took off in the hood. It was kind of crazy because everyone was reading Spawn comics at school, and these dudes would be toughing in gangs. And I think what it was because it wasn't corny, so there was an edge to it. You know what I mean? And so that edge was very alluring to the environment I was in.
So I would on occasion pick up a issue of Spawn. I picked up at least one in my day of going to my local comic book shop, and it's really hard to jump onto other than from the beginning. And I've seen other people talk about Spawn and be oh, there's no good story arcs, there's no memorable thing that you can draw upon. But yeah, I mean, I grew up with the animated series. I watched that for free on YouTube when my parents weren't looking.
While the comic was red hot, McFarlane further capitalized on the growing fandom by creating his own toy line company, Todd Toys, later renamed to McFarlane Toys, where Todd debuted his Spawn-inspired action figures. By 1997, Spawn's popularity in the mainstream media peaked, with the summer premiere of the hit HBO animated show and the lackluster Spawn live-action movie. It seemed that Spawn was on the trajectory to be an A-list comic book character, in the same status of a Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman, or at the very least, the level just below them. After the last episode of the HBO Spawn series aired, there has been radio silence for Spawn outside of the comic shops and comic book conventions. So what happened with this character, who has seemed to be set up to be a multimedia juggernaut? The first answer starts with Todd McFarlane's creative control of the character. Spawn is completely owned by McFarlane, and he wants to do what he seems fit for the character. There has been an off and on again news for an upcoming sequel to the Spawn movie, starting as far back as 2017, with very slow traction coming for this film, solely due to Todd being adamant to direct the film. I don't blame him for trying to take the helm of the next film, especially after what happened with the last movie, where the director wanted to focus on choppy special effects rather than telling a coherent and meaningful story.
The first cut had something like 71 special effect things in it, and the story was absolutely intact. You see my character starts off in a loving relationship, and you see what his home life is and why he wants to get out of doing the things he's doing. Right. And then there was so much editing and so much change, so many changes, that the director, who's a special effects guy, I believe by the end of it, there was 414 special effects shots.
The Spawn animated TV show told the story of Spawn way better than the movie ever did. Todd has been making sure that he has had his hands on everything that comes with the character and its likeness, even to the detriment of the character's popularity. Many Hollywood studios wouldn't take a chance on a new director to run the show on a horror-themed superhero film. Todd ran into some luck with Blumhouse Studios picking up the movie, signing a few A-list actors to be featured in the film like Jamie Foxx. So it seems that things are moving in the way Todd is wanting. This is a prime example of Todd McFarlane treating his character like a baby, but he has also milked Spawn since its inception as well. McFarlane's main reason for defecting from the big-time comic companies was due to corporate oversight, as well as a lack of compensation for the comics he has contributed to, seeing his artwork being used as t-shirts, posters, and other merchandise that he wasn't getting paid for, let alone credit for. Editors constantly telling him what he could or couldn't do in his comics, though prior to him taking over certain titles, they were not nearly as successful once he started drawing them. Immediately after Spawn started to grow in popularity, McFarlane was quick to bastardize the character as much as the big two do with their flagship characters. Countless toys and comic book spin-off series, producing all the merchandise he could make using the Spawn likeness. As the years went on, Todd put the art supplies down and started focusing on more lucrative ventures like his toy line, which has made him way more money than he ever would have being a full-time comic book artist. Spawn was never a perfect comic book from day one. Outside of Todd McFarlane's beautiful artwork on the initial run and Greg Capullo's follow-up issues, the comic was essentially okay. The story for Spawn is, well, not the greatest. Spawn's overall plot was very hard for me to follow. There are a lot of half thought out ideas, especially in the early run. McFarlane was seemingly just winging it when plotting the comic. Todd also hired a few of the biggest comic book writers to come in and help him with the first few issues of Spawn, but again, didn't do much as far as continuity goes. Neil Gaiman, in my opinion, added the most lore to the series with his issue 9 contributions in writing for Spawn. In the long run, hiring Neil Gaiman did Todd no good because, as some of you may know, Neil sued McFarlane for lack of proper compensation for what he did and added to the Spawn universe. Spawn, from the jump, story-wise, was a mess. Spawn hits you with heavy lore, heaven versus hell, angels, demon, necro soldiers right up front. It's very dense. There are times when certain pages are filled with text. This lack of proper consistency in lore, I also believe, contributed to Spawn being put in this limbo as well.
Okay, so the big criticism at the time was that the artist became too big at Marvel, so it was all about the artist. And Todd McFarlane singularly is the representation of the alternative path of, like, if Marvel let the artists still become superstars. Like Spawn, what you have today would be the outcome of that. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what your Marvel Studios would be looking like. Your Marvel Comics, sorry. It would be if the artist was in control.
That being said, as far as comic sales goes, Spawn sells fairly strongly to this day. I'm not sure how many new readers the comics bring in, but I know that the Spawn fan base is deep. King Spawn #1 a few years back was the best-selling comic of that year. King Spawn being one of the many new waves of spin-off comics coming from the newly birthed Spawn universe. Spawn also broke the record for indie comics, passing 300 issues. This record was once set by Dave Sims in his comic series Cerebus. After passing issue 300, Spawn is now the longest running creator-owned comic series. With all of this relative success Spawn still has, especially compared to the original Image comics that came out with it, what is the holdup? Why hasn't it been made into another movie, TV show, or anything of that sort?
There's just, like, what angle do you take with Spawn that, like, we haven't seen before? And how do you make Alice Simmons, like, obviously those first few issues, like, give him, like, who am I? What is my purpose?
Yeah.
Wanda!
Yeah.
And, like, you get the idea behind him, and you like his little awful sidekick, the Violator, as much as you want. Is there anything beyond, I don't know, him confronting just, like, the first year of the character where we can, like, have any kind of greater nuance to him? Like, is there any social commentary you can bring to the fold? I know it sounds annoying to say that, but, like, how can we make Spawn relevant to today more so than he was during the 90s?
That TV series was so good. That you could take that TV series and make that and call that the Spawn movie and literally change history tomorrow. Like, a lot of people don't know, but Madhouse worked on that. And so you have, like, a Japanese studio at their peak working on Spawn. And the story is great, the mood, the tone, like, all they have to do, but that show's forgotten. You know what I mean?
Spawn isn't a Spider-Man or a Batman. He's not quippy or family-friendly. He's brutal, demonic, and dives deep into themes of damnation, revenge, and existential dread. That made him cool in the 90s, but it also limited his mainstream appeal. Hollywood prefers superheroes with 4-quadrant appeal, characters that work for both kids and adults. domestic and international audiences. Spawn, he is a rated horror with Christian demonology and government conspiracies baked in. Great for fans, but it may be risky for investors. With that being said, there's another comic series that premiered a few months later after Spawn and the initial image boom by another legendary creator, someone who didn't have the initial popularity boost Todd brought to Spawn. Another dark, grim character that deals with brutal and demonic themes, Christian-related dogma and such. A series jam-packed with myth and lore from all over the world. That comic is Mike Mignola's Hellboy.
Hellboy, 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 Hellboy.
Hellboy was created by Mike Mignola and first appeared in San Diego Comic-Con Comics #2. But it was the launch of Hellboy, Seed of Destruction in 1994, co-written with John Byrne, that really set the tone. Mignola's art is instantly recognizable. Thick shadows, gothic architect, and minimalized detail that somehow feels rich. It's like Lovecraft met a pulp detective comic. Hellboy isn't just about fighting monsters, it's about exploring myth. Norse gods, Russian folklore, ancient demons, it's all on the table.
When I read Hellboy, I discovered Hellboy, I think that was in the mid 90s. So I got it from the library, actually. It wasn't really a book you would see at the comic book shop normally, and you would occasionally see it pop up in Wizard, but I seen Concrete more than Hellboy at the stores, and that's it. Concrete's a completely obscured, Dark Horse book at this point. But when I would read it, it felt more like literacy, like it felt, because there was folklore. There's like characters that you could look up that were like historical figures. There's time periods. The stories were concise enough to where you would get a short story. So it was more palatable, and I would always pick it up. Even if I read the issue before, I would go and pick it up again. These would be trades or whatever at the library.
Mignola weaves a massive, interconnected web of global mythology with Hellboy smacked in the middle. Unlike McFarlane, Mignola wasn't a household name in the big two comic book publishers. Mike jumped from project to project, not being a particular fan of the superhero genre as a whole. Mignola struck gold with Hellboy, though it took more time for Hellboy to hit in the same way as Spawn, never having a best-selling comic or any of the recognition Spawn initially had.
Felt more researched, and it definitely felt like, oh, what he's bringing into the fold is like stuff that will relate to Hellboy's struggle. Like, it's not just like set dressing for the set of set dressing, or like there's a war between heaven and hell taking place and like you're seeing a million different cool designs. You are getting like a focused storyline per introduction of whatever mythology he's playing with, and you get to see like the cool nuances of that, like in the Crooked Man, or like the Corpse especially. Just how it touches on like myth and the nature of fae, and like how old folk tales kind of like come back in the modern era.
Hellboy has had more success outside of comics than Spawn. As of this recording, Hellboy has had 4 movies and 2 animated films. 2 of those films were smash hits with respectable views and a strong cult following. Now, how has this happened? Spawn, a character created by one of the most popular comic book creators of all time, with all the keys to make this character a mega hit. Then there's Hellboy, much like his creator, who had the slow burn to success. Now, I'd argue they're both on the same level of popularity. Both Mignola and McFarlane had a stronghold on both characters, although I'd say both did not have the same respect for the characters. I touched on it a bit earlier, but after a while, Todd got too busy with making toys to really give too much creative juice into Spawn. McFarlane tried to hire writers, but it didn't seem to do much. And as Spawn has gone on, I'd say it's been more of a hit or miss when trying to do something different or a gimmick to get more readers. Spawn has had countless spin-off comics, video games, and video game appearances, a manga, and much more. So many different characters were created and costume design changes to Spawn just so McFarlane could make more money off these characters as toy adaptations. In the comics, these characters tended to fall flat. It would seem that McFarlane is trying to do what Marvel and DC are doing with their flagship characters by maximizing on the IPs of said characters in more than just comics. But Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man actually have fantastic comic book runs and story arcs. Not all of these characters' comics are perfect or readable, but there are storylines and plot points from these characters that have enamored fanboys over the decades. Spawn has never had one story arc or a few issue runs that have made you fall in love with the character of Spawn or even Al Simmons. The people followed the comic for McFarlane and his amazing artwork. At this point, and even at the beginning of the comics run, Spawn was just aura farming, using the coolness to sell the comics, but coolness doesn't work in Hollywood, it seems, especially with an IP that doesn't have a rich history of stories or ideas to pull from that can be easily translated into a movie or a TV show. Mignola, though, didn't have this problem. He respects and loves Hellboy. Unlike Spawn, Mignola told a complete story with Hellboy. Hellboy stories all come from Mignola's love of folklore and mythology. All of these elements show up in Hellboy's comics. Hellboy's tone and story is consistent throughout the comic. The comic also has a beginning, middle, and an end to it.
Spawn is definitely like, especially what you said, it is driven on the hype of what Spawn could be, when in reality Spawn is just like there.
Yeah.
And then Hellboy is like, you're there, and then you like, oh, I love this. As you like the longer, like, it is definitely a marketing firm versus like a one guy act.
It's like the organic growth of like a indie musician compared to like the one hit wonder, whereas like the one hit wonder is going to be there, you know, for the first 5 years, and after that is going to be gone. And the indie creator by year 5, he's going to have the strongest following going on tour compared to the one hit wonder. So from my experience reading Hellboy, you can kind of jump in most places and not feel lost. I've read one-off stories from Hellboy and felt engulfed into a new world, but not lost in it, like I would with a random issue of Spawn. Some of my favorite runs of Hellboy are The Crooked Man and Hellboy in Mexico. Both of these comics work well as standalone stories for Hellboy, but elements in these story arcs are also important and referenced in later comics. I've even read Hellboy in Hell without reading all the comics that led up to that story arc and didn't feel lost or like I've missed out on something. The Hellboy comic doesn't try to catch you up on random data dumping or editor notes, just organic storytelling. This type of storytelling and world building is what drew in a director like Guillermo del Toro to bring Hellboy to the big screen in such a fantastic way. Even to this day, Hellboy and certain stories from the comics are being adapted. Some of the most recent films have been somewhat lackluster, like the Crooked Man movie, but it's still happening for this character who still hasn't broken any comic book sales records, where Spawn has and continues to sell very well, though it doesn't seem to make it out of the comic book stores, conventions, or a playable character.
There are ways you can do Hellboy where it's like there have been multiple angles taken with him, from Del Toro to the Wild Hunt movie to Crooked Man's movie to the animated shorts that come out to even like something as simple as like Injustice's take on him, where it's just like you get the gist of who he is from his motions alone and from how he talks and how he confronts different threats with just like a sense of nonchalance. And with Al Simmons, it's difficult because everything is so serious. Everything is so brooding. Everything is Wanda.
Mike has the ability to connect readers to Hellboy, because you have to remember, we live in America. It says hell on the cover to any Christian, and you have to be realistic. They're gonna be like, I'm not putting this in my house.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna let somebody read Hellboy, but no one thinks of Hellboy that way. They're like, oh, this character's awesome. Versus Spawn, which is another demon type, you know, people like, oh, this character's badass, you know, but it doesn't have that same human connection. You know, so I think that's the core. If I had to break down the essence of the two different things and how they're like similar but completely different.
There isn't any real trust in the IP, especially since Todd wants to direct the next movie, but isn't a proven writer or world builder himself. This leads me to my final point, which is art versus capitalism. Two things that mix like water and oil. Todd has seemingly taken the route of making the most money out of this smash hit character, and I don't blame him. Being a comic book creator, specifically an artist, is very hard. I should know, I make my own comics. You put so many years learning and improving your craft, then so many hours at the drawing table bringing these characters and comics to life just for a very meager wage. Before Spawn, McFarlane put in those hours and produced so many pages for Marvel and DC that once he got the chance to swing for a home run with Spawn, he did. Though it may have been to the detriment of the character in the long run, it was what was best for him and his family. Mignola, on the other hand, seemed to care solely about his comic and the world he can create around him. And once other avenues appeared for Hellboy to be brought to a bigger audience, he took them only under his own creative control.
What Mike did with Hellboy. So when that, I think the film was 2004, and when that film hit, you saw this, he was kind of prepared because I would say that he managed that property really well because he got people like Guy Davis and was it BDRP or whatever. So he started work on that. The quality was consistent because he focused on the storytelling, right? And he let the artist shine. And so you can kind of see how it nurtures itself and it evolves. And then you can draw that parallel a little bit with Todd. But what happens is that his brand became so global when you're looking at things like Todd Toys. Todd comes from a perspective of ambition, and it's hard to be ambitious and work as hard as Todd. No one works harder than Todd. Yeah. They're entrepreneurs, and they're operating from two different languages, though. One's like an artist, he's curating his space, versus Todd is pulling things into his universe. And so I think if Todd wants to have that success that Mike has with the property, it's going to have to be a great story, something that has a little bit more feeling to it, a love story, like really put emphasis on these kind of attributes, because in order for Spawn to connect, he has to be human again. You know what I mean? Yeah. And all we get is Hellspawn at this point, So there has to be some sort of human connection.
All in all, both these creators and characters are in the top 1% of comic book fame and hierarchy in their own right. And these creators did what they felt was best for their comic careers. And I commend both of them for that. Hopefully one day I'm in that same realm and I have future YouTubers making videos about how I sold out. And time isn't up for Spawn yet to make a multimedia resurgence. There's still hope for this character, especially with the dark and violent comic book adaptations coming out as of late with shows like The Boys and Invincible. More than a movie though, I'd love to see them bring back Spawn as a cartoon or an anime. I think that would be more fitting for that character. First of all, I want to say shout out to Brian and Jordan for giving their inputs on this video. They gave really great insight. They also have really dope channels, so go check out Brian at Power to the Panel. I'll put the link for his channel in the description, and shout out Jordan from The Log. He has also really great video essays, so go check him out also. He also has a really good video on Hellboy I would highly recommend. This idea kind of came about because I always felt like Spawn is one of those characters that everybody always recommends when you start getting into reading comics. So I always felt like Spawn was way more popular than he is. Relatively speaking, I would say Spawn is probably in the top 50 superhero characters, and outside of like a Marvel and DC, is definitely probably the most popular character to come out of like a non-corporate owned comic company. So I always felt like it's strange that he hasn't made it past the comic book shops since 2000, especially with him still selling really, really well in the comic book stores. Todd McFarlane hasn't really lost his popularity in terms of just like being a household name in the comic book industry as well as in the toy industry, So I always felt like it's interesting. And then when I started doing the research for the video, I started realizing, wait, there's another character who's fairly similar in tone and theme as Spawn, which is Hellboy. And I thought it was kind of funny that Hellboy has made it way past probably people ever thought it would have ever gotten to. The 4 movie adaptations, the animated shows, and I'm sure there'll be more and more movies that come about. Obviously, Hellboy's Hollywood love has kind of dwindled with you can kind of see that with the Crooked Man movie, where it's more of like an indie style movie. But even the idea that there are directors and movie studios who believe and love Hellboy to the extent that they're still going to fork out some cash to make the movie is awesome, and it is interesting especially the comparison to the two. Spawn, I mean honestly, Spawn is just aura farming at this point. It's just like a super cool character, people that are fans of the comic just love it that much that they just keep buying and supporting it. Todd is doing, Kickstarters for toys that are selling out. Like the Kickstarters are doing like super great. We'll see. Hopefully they do make the movie adaptation. Hopefully it does fairly well and it is cool. Like I said earlier, I would love to see a more of an animated Spawn series. I think that would work best. It worked best with the 90s show, so I don't see why they don't just go with that. I don't understand why people who own comics or like comic creators always want a movie and not a show. I think a show works better, especially for like comics that are like long, like comic books that have like super long runs. I think TV shows are like best fitting for those types of series, but yeah, I don't know. I guess there's more money in movies, I guess. I'm a comic book creator myself. I have a bunch of comics currently on my website you can go check out. I have bundle deals. You can buy individual comics and stuff of that nature. Free digital download comics as well. So I would highly appreciate your support and go checking that out. I also started a Patreon. So on my Patreon, I am going to be doing like comic book reviews. So if you are a comic book creator and you want to have your comic book reviewed, subscribe to my Patreon and I'm going to do like a submissions list. Whoever is a part of the Patreon will be able to see your review. I'm also going to be probably doing like reviews of just like comics that I like or I've read, because I've gotten so many requests of people wanting me to review certain comics or talk about certain comics. So I'm going to put that on my Patreon. I also have a bunch of tutorials up on how you can build your own YouTube channel. So go check that out if you're interested in that. I'm going to be doing future tutorials on my creative process when it comes to making comics. Again, I appreciate everybody for watching this video to the very end. Like, comment, subscribe, go check out the Patreon, go check out Powers of the Panel, and go check out the log. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.